In this talk, we're going to look at the different factors that affect the evolution of living organisms. Let us first learn what is meant by the term evolution in a biological context. Evolution refers to the changes that occur in organisms in a population over time. And these changes occur due to changes in the genetic composition or the genotype of the organisms in a population. We know that DNA is the genetic material that is present in all living organisms, and hence the genetic composition or genotype of an organism depends on the kind of DNA that it has. DNA codes for other types of macromolecules like ribonucleic acid and proteins, and these macromolecules play very important roles in the normal development, functioning, and reproduction of living organisms. Living organisms have evolved with time. The first living organisms that appeared on Earth were unicellular prokaryotic organisms that had a simpler internal composition. As time passed on, these prokaryotic organisms gave rise to eukaryotic organisms that were more complex in nature. The first eukaryotic organisms were also unicellular organisms. These unicellular organisms were then able to form multicellular organisms. It is thought that a unicellular organism was able to combine with other unicellular organisms to form a colony. In this colony, there was no division of labor among the cells, but they tend to stay together because it provided the colony with certain survival advantages. As time passed on, the cells started undergoing changes and were assigned defined functions. And thus, we started looking at multicellular organisms where tissue started forming. They evolved further to be able to give rise to specialized cells that were now able to undergo sexual reproduction. And thus, we are able to see how a unicellular organism was able to evolve to form a multicellular organism that could undergo sexual reproduction. This evolution of living organisms was driven by many different factors. Some of these factors are mutations, mating patterns, gene flow, population size, and natural selection. Let us first look at mutations. Mutations are changes that occur in DNA. The DNA of an organism is present in a highly compact state because DNA molecules tend to be very long, as observed in this figure. Here, the thread-like structures surrounding the cylinder are the strands of DNA, and this entire thread-like structure corresponds to one single molecule of DNA. And hence, it is folded so that it can remain inside the confines of a cell. When we look at the nucleus of eukaryotic cells where the DNA resides, we cannot see them unless the cell undergoes cell division, where now we are able to see the thread-like structures of DNA in the form of chromosomes. Mutations are changes that occur in DNA or chromosome numbers in a cell. Here's an example where we are able to see that one nucleotide in the DNA, which is the thymine nucleotide, has undergone a change to become a cytosine. And here we can see an example of a change in a nucleotide of the DNA. This is an example of a point mutation or a base substitution. There can be changes in DNA at the chromosomal level as shown in the middle picture. And here we are able to see that the gene called as gene B has undergone a duplication and there is an extra copy of that gene on the chromosome. This is also an example of a mutation. We can also have entire duplication of chromosomes as observed in this figure to the right. Here we are able to see chromosome number 21, where instead of just 2 copies of it, there are 3 copies, and hence there is an extra chromosome 21. And similarly, there is an extra X chromosome. And hence a mutation can also involve changes in the number of chromosomes. Mutations can occur spontaneously through normal cellular processes like DNA replication. In this example, we are able to see that during the process of DNA replication, a thymine got changed into guanine. If this is not repaired, then during successive rounds of replication, the guanine remains instead of it being turned back into a thymine, and thus now a mutation has been introduced in the DNA. Another way mutations can arise spontaneously is through recombination events, which is the exchange of genetic material between chromosomes, especially homologous chromosomes. We can also have recombination events involving non-homologous chromosomes as well, which can give rise to mutations. Mutations can also be induced by external agents like radiation. The ultraviolet light that comes from the sun can cause damage to the DNA and thereby induce mutations. In addition to ultraviolet light, we can also have other types of radiation like X-rays and gamma rays that can also damage the DNA and induce mutations. In addition to radiation, other agents like chemicals can also cause mutations in the DNA of a cell. Mutations or changes in the genetic content of an organism can also occur through a horizontal gene transfer, where genetic information or DNA is obtained either from the environment or from other organisms. In many prokaryotic organisms, we are able to see the bacteria or archaea obtain DNA from the environment through the process of transformation or through outer membrane vesicles. We also are aware of the process of conjugation, where one bacteria is able to transfer DNA to another bacteria through a sex pilus. Finally, we know that viruses can also introduce genetic material into organisms through a process called as transduction. These are different examples of horizontal gene transfer that can also cause changes in the genetic composition of a cell. Mutations can also occur when there are errors in cell division, which can cause a change in the total number of chromosomes, and one of the extremes is the duplication of entire genomes. So here we're able to look at a cell that has 4 chromosomes or 2 homologous chromosomes. When there is an error in cell division, then we're able to see that the entire genome can undergo duplication when the DNA is replicated before cell division. However, after cell division, instead of forming daughter cells, the cell still remains as one cell. And in this case, the cell now has double the content of DNA. And hence, instead of having only 4 chromosomes, it has 8 chromosomes. We are aware of such events that have happened in different organisms where entire genomes have undergone duplication to give rise to different types of organisms. Another factor that is able to drive evolution is mating patterns. Many multicellular organisms show the phenomenon of sexual reproduction, where the gametes from a male and a female can fuse to form a zygote. This zygote then undergoes development to give rise to the whole organism. Sexual reproduction generates offspring that have a genetic composition different than their parents. Thus, it is able to explain why members of a family do not look identical to one another, but do show similarities to one another. When we look at mating patterns, there are two main mating patterns. One is random mating, where there are no preferences between the two individuals that are going to mate. On the other hand, we have non-random mating, when the individuals do have preferences while choosing their mates. These preferences could be physical in nature, or they could be behavior in nature. It should be noted that the genetic composition of individuals that are related to one another is similar. And hence, when mating occurs among related individuals, it actually decreases the genetic variation of the different members present in that family. Such a phenomenon where mating occurs among related individuals is called as inbreeding. We are able to see inbreeding in different organisms, especially those that are hermaphrodites, which means they have both male and female sex organs. Such organisms are able to undergo self-fertilization, and thereby the genetic variation among the offspring is really not that much. Hence, inbreeding is known to decrease the genetic variation in a population. On the other hand, when mating occurs between non-related individuals, it increases the genetic variation in the progeny, and thus the population also has more genetic variation among the individuals that form that population. Another factor that drives evolution is gene flow. Gene flow is the mixing of genetic information among individuals, especially when migration occurs. When you have a scenario where a group of individuals enter an existing population through the process of immigration and then start mating with the people in that population, then we are able to see the phenomenon of gene flow. Gene flow is known to increase the genetic variation of a population and is able to drive evolution in a more positive manner. Another factor that can affect the evolution of organisms is the size of the population. When population sizes are small, they can show sudden random changes in the genetic composition of the offsprings that arise. And this phenomenon is called as genetic drift. An example of genetic drift can be seen through the founder effect. This is a situation when few individuals from a population leave that population, move to another place, and become founders of the population at that different place. The progeny that are formed from these few founding members of the population will not have a lot of genetic variation, and hence the founder effect causes a decrease in genetic variation in the population. Another type of genetic drift is called as the bottleneck effect. In this case, there is a drastic decrease in the population, which could occur due to natural effects like a sudden drought, where there is too few resources, because of which many of the organisms die. In such a scenario, the existing survivors of the population, if they are able to recover, then the progeny are going to show a decrease in genetic variation because the genetic composition of the existing population does not have a lot of diversity in itself. Thus, when small populations are present, genetic drift can occur that causes a decrease in the genetic variation present in a population. One of the most important drivers of evolution is natural selection. This is a process where only those organisms that are able to adapt to environmental changes will survive and reproduce to produce more offspring. Let us take an example of this mouse population. where the coat color can be either dark or lighter. Now, as we look at this figure, we're able to see that the dark colored mouse isn't able to camouflage with its surroundings, and hence it doesn't blend in. This causes predators to be able to catch the dark colored mouse more easily than the light colored one. And hence, when we look at the population of these mice, we will have more mice that are going to be tan colored or lighter colored than those that are going to be darker in color. Now imagine that there was a forest fire and the soot and ash that was created by this fire was blown away by the wind and deposited on the rock that caused the rock to become a darker color. Now in this scenario, the black colored mouse is able to blend in very effectively and hence predators cannot catch it as easily. However, the lighter colored mouse is now unable to blend in with its surroundings and hence is a much more better target for predators. In this situation, what we will observe is that there will be now lesser light colored mice in the population and more dark colored mice, because these dark colored mice will be able to survive and reproduce to give rise to progeny that tend to have the darker coat color. Thus, natural selection is able to protect those organisms that have the ability to adapt to different types of conditions, like the presence of predators, the presence of insecticides or pesticides in the modern day, in the presence of antimicrobial agents like antibiotics, in the presence of extremes of environment, as well as any types of other conditions. With this, we come to the end of our talk, where we learned about the different factors that can affect evolution, which include mutations, mating patterns, gene flow, population size, and natural selection. We also learned that some of these factors can promote genetic variation that drives evolution, like mutations and natural selection. On the other hand, there are other factors that can suppress genetic variation, like small population sizes or inbreeding.